Hi, everyone, and welcome to another episode of SEOs Getting Coffee. And it's a super special one today. We have with us Jack. Jack is one of my favorite people. He is from Candour, a Norwich-based agency. And I came to visit him on Search with Candour, which is one of my favorite podcasts. So listen to it if you haven't. You've been living under a rock if you haven't. So you do need to kind of go and listen to the podcast. And now he's here to talk to me and Sean about, again, a topic close to my heart. I say this every time. Because all of those topics.
SEO is close to your heart.
Exactly. So we'll be talking today about authenticity, and particularly why authenticity is super important in 2025 and beyond when we're talking about content and brands being online. So Jack, do you want to quickly intro yourself? Although I bet everybody knows you anyway. So.
I don't know. I don't think everybody knows me. That's definitely not true. But I appreciate you mentioning, like you said, you were on my podcast a couple of months ago at time of recording, so back in June of 2024. We had a lot of fun talking about agency red flags, and I love the recent post you did talking about the big client that you guys had that tough decision around and all that kind of stuff. And I really appreciate the kind of honesty you guys have with the show, the agency in general, and the whole kind of vibes, because that's kind of what we do at Candour, and that's the kind of thing I want to talk about on this episode. And it's my whole kind of vibe from a podcasting perspective, from a content perspective, is trying to be candid and authentic and open and honest and all this kind of stuff. If any of you have met me, and if you will be meeting me at Brighton SEO, this is me on a podcast. This is me in real life. This is me talking to my wife, talking to clients. I'm minus a few F-bombs here and there. I'm pretty much the same person, give or take, no matter who I'm speaking to. And I think that has kind of helped me with a lot of my podcasting stuff. I've been podcasting for nearly 15 years now. So that's like a real integral part of my career, weirdly enough, considering I started off just recording on Skype with some friends from America back in my university days. And now that somehow transitioned to 12 years later, Mark messaging me, who's my boss here at Candour, on LinkedIn, being like, hey, I listened to your podcast, which was my film podcast, Sequel, which I still do. And I hear you do a bit of SEO as well. Would you be interested in joining us at Candour? And that was the LinkedIn DM that ended up getting me this job. And I've now been at Candour for 3 years. I started off as an SEO specialist, and now I'm the marketing and partnerships manager. So I don't do too much client work anymore. I still help out with a lot of clients here and there with some content bits and pieces, and some we did some post-migration work the other day as well. But mostly my job is now organizing our events, so Search Norwich and stuff like that. The live podcast I do with the SEO Mindset crew, Sarah and Tasman, which we do before Brighton SEO, and all of our internal marketing as well. So I help Mark run our newsletter, which is core updates. Obviously, I run, edit, produce the podcast all by myself from scratch. And all of our kind of like case studies, internal stuff. We've got a new website launching hopefully by the end of this year, and I've written a lot of the content and the SEO side of things for the new website as well. So kind of all internal marketing stuff, and obviously working with sponsorships, charity partners, all that kind of stuff is a big part of my role today as well.
That's brilliant. You're a busy man.
Yeah.
Jack, absolutely. We're delighted to have you. And that's the thing that, we're kind of just saying is that, it's an absolute pleasure to have a seasoned podcasting pro to show us the ropes, really, because obviously SEOs Getting Coffee is still kind of in its infancy. So it's an absolute pleasure to have you on. And thank you very much for joining us. I guess let's dive in really and just start kind of talking about authenticity, I guess. And I think it's quite strange actually, because it's come around quite fast. And obviously as we go into the end quarter of this year, thinking about 2025 already, but your approach and I guess your kind of the theme that you'd like to talk about today, I guess, is essentially that you believe that authenticity is going to be play a large role in content in 2025 in terms of separating, separating great content from poor content and whatnot. Could you just, I guess, give us a little bit of an intro into that subject a little bit, and we'll just kind of go from there.
Yeah, absolutely. First of all, I'm a listener/watcher of this show, so it's a pleasure to be on. I didn't say that at the beginning. I feel I should definitely get out of the way. I know you've seen me in the comments and the likes a couple of times, so I'm a big fan of you guys as well. But yeah, I think authenticity is going to be such a game changer and a kind of a filter for a lot of the rubbish we're seeing on so much of the SERPs. And I know, obviously, with the whole highlights of Reddit in the SERPs and they're soaring, I think I saw from Lily Ray's study with AMSIV, it's like 1,400% increase in Reddit visibility. It's now in the top 5 most visible domains of the US, in the world, something like that. Absolutely ridiculous numbers. But I think it's that push towards a lot of the UGC kind of things. And to me, I think authenticity is the side of EEAT that kind of ties into a lot of the trust signals we talk about when it comes to sort of like the search quality rater guidelines and all that kind of stuff. It's a difficult thing to measure, I think, but I think it's a difference maker when it comes to the amount of kind of AI generated stuff that's being churned out, coming round to that firsthand experience side of things. And for me, and this is, talking from my experience as a consumer, I tend to be a very loyal consumer to the brands, the shows, the podcasts. I'm a big podcast listener as well. Like, I will listen to something religiously on there every day it comes out, and I will buy the same, album from the same band and all this kind of stuff. And it's often if their values align with mine, if I feel like they're being open and honest with me as a customer, as a listener, whatever it is, that's where I really resonate with a lot of the brands and creators that I follow and continue to follow. I come from a background of comic book publishing and writing as well. That was kind of one of my very early parts of my career, which clearly didn't go well because I'm an SEO now. But there was a lot of that factor when I first started reading comics. You would follow like, oh, I'm a big Spider-Man fan, I'm a big Batman fan, whatever it is. But I found myself gravitating towards particular writers or particular artists and actually following a particular artist. Take Scott Snyder, who worked at DC, for example. I followed him from his Batman series onto his own independent work because I appreciated him as a creator and his voice and his ideas, rather than just continuing to read the Batman series regardless of who's writing or drawing it. I found myself gravitating towards the people behind it. And I feel the same way about articles. Like I mentioned your article, Emina, about the honesty and openness that you were talking about with the struggles that agencies go through, because so many people just want to show line goes up on a LinkedIn graph, right? And just do a couple of like, everything's great, we're the best agency ever. Yeah, we make millions of dollars, whatever. But being open and honest for me makes me realize, oh yeah, we all go through struggles. We all have this similar kind of stuff. When you have an authentic voice, I think that's where you really can establish brand loyalty, creator loyalty, and kind of really connect with the audience in a human way rather than just a marketing-y kind of way. Because there are some creators I follow, I like their advice, but I would never want to go to the pub with them. You know what I mean? Whereas most of the people I really, really care about and people I will support through creator funding, like Patreon and all that kind of stuff, those are the kind of people I really want to support and be like, yeah, my values align with you. I know you're creating content you care about, so that makes me care about it.
Yeah, exactly. And it has, I mean, you were talking about kind of how the SERPs has changed and how it really does have grounding in search as well. Moz came out with a recent study about, I mean, they talk a lot about domain authority and stuff like that, about the impact of HCU and the recovery that some brands have seen, and kind of the difference between, the ratio between kind of the links that you have as a brand and your content, kind of your branded searches, in particular navigational kind of queries, and how when that's disaligned, how actually that can be seen as SEO, too much SEO, whatever. And underneath it, we were talking about a lot of things, but one of them is kind of this idea of information gain, which is in one of the Google patents as well. And it aligns really, really well with authenticity as well. Because when you think about information gain, where does it come from? It comes from that place of experience, authenticity. I've done this, I've been there, I've gone through it, and this is the experience that I have. So I mean, I find it really fascinating. But to you, like, we talk about it a lot, but how, and we spoke about this in Brighton SEO last time when you had the live podcast, how do you actually achieve, is is there something as achieving authenticity? Because obviously you need to first know yourself, and for even for individuals, that's really hard. How can brands do it? I mean, you know, if we're individuals, it's so hard.
Yeah,
What can
definitely.
brands do?
I think it's a really interesting kind of thought experiment. Like you said, I think it comes from a lot of understanding yourself individually, and then when it comes to a brand, how do those kind of people come together? So say you have a team of content writers, or you're working as an agency working with a brand, understanding that brand and what their values are, and finding a voice. I know this is true. Again, I have kind of a writing and have a background in music as well. So it's like when you have to find your voice, it's really like, what's going to separate me from 100 other, you know, musicians in the same genre, or 100 other podcasters doing the same kind of thing. The fact that I talked to you guys before, I talk about what the guys at Good Signals do with SEO office hours. Like, they feel like they're doing something different because it feels live and community led and all that kind of stuff. That is totally not what Search with Candour is. I love what they do, but that is not my vibe. I tend to listen to more of the produced kind of like one-on-one in-depth interviewee kind of stuff. And to get that authentic kind of Q&A stuff from the SEO office hours feels so different. And I was chatting to Joe and Mike, who produced that show and create that show, and they were talking about like, yeah, that was a conscious decision for us to fill that space when Google kind of became less regular with their posting of SEO office hours. Now they do it kind of a bit sporadically here and there. And that was a conscious decision from me from Search with Candour. I took it over from Mark, who is, you mentioned like, oh, who doesn't know Jack? Really, who doesn't know Mark Williams Cook? My boss, the SEO director here, is much, much more famous than I am in SEO, and has been doing
You're
SEO.
getting there, though, Jack.
I'm trying. I'm riding his coattails a little bit, more than a little bit. But yeah, Mark has been in SEO for over 20 years. To put that into perspective, I've been in it for like 5 or 6. So I've got a lot of catching up to do, and I don't intend to catch up or take Mark's space or anything like that. But it was a lot of weight on my shoulders to come over and be like, okay, you're taking over a podcast I was already a listener of, to then come on and be like, you are now the full-time host. And it was very nice, funnily enough, to come back round to kind of the WAT side of things. The trust Mark had in me to be like, I've heard you do a podcast. I know you now as an SEO, because it was about 6 months or so of working at Candour before he fully passed the reins over to me and was like, at the start of 2022, it's all yours, do what you like, essentially, and was like, off to the races. And I think that was a big moment for me when it came to, oh, now I'm not just talking about myself. I'm not just Jack on a podcast. I am now the brand speaking as Candour. You can, if you're watching, folks, you can see the literal sign for Candour behind over the top of my head here on the wall behind me. This isn't a virtual thing. That is a real actual sign behind my head. And I've always kind of had that discussion with John, Jessica, and Mark, the 3 directors here at Candour, and having that conversation of how can I represent the band and represent the voice of the brand when it comes to the podcast side of things, whether that's the little design tweaks of like using the right font in a thumbnail, or whether it's how often I talk about our clients. Obviously, I'm not breaking NDAs or naming clients or anything like that, but being able to openly and honestly talk about like, oh, I had this experience with one of my e-commerce clients last year. They had a lot of international SEO issues, and we did this thing, and that's how I resolved their, href lang problem or whatever it is. Talking openly about issues, talking openly about things, I think is how we as an industry grow and learn and benefit from each other. That's the benefits of shows like this, where we all get together and talk about our issues, our problems, our thoughts, our ideas, our theories, sometimes even. And I think for me, that was a big kind of learning process, going from, I know my individual voice. I'd been podcasting for 10 years already at that point. I was kind of aware of how to talk into a microphone, when to swear, when not to swear, when to say things, when not to say things, all that kind of stuff. But to then become essentially the voice of Candour as a brand, which is a pretty well-established agency here in the UK. And like I said, a lot from Mark's social media presence and all of the amazing content he's created, the 130-ish episodes he did previously as well, that are all really interesting and had some amazing guests on as well. It was a big journey for me to then go like, okay, how do I bring my voice into this and make it feel different and feel like me, but still feel like Candour? And I think I'm still learning. I'm not saying I'm the expert here. Obviously, I'm not suddenly like, oh yeah, I'm a brand expert or anything like that. But I think it is that process of having conversations with people. Like I said, I'm in regular conversation with the guys here at Candour, whether that's the directors or the other SEO guys or even developers and designers we have here on the team, what do you think? Does this make sense? How does this work? Always being able to ask questions and don't get too kind of bogged down and stuck in your ways. Be able to be flexible and agile and think, oh, actually, no, I did make a mistake there. I used the wrong font on a thumbnail the other day, and John, our creative director, was like, please make sure you use the correct branded fonts. Like that's an important part because you're representing our brand.
Yeah.
I'm not a designer. I'm not on the design team, but we have professional designers here. And that then reflects on our design team. So I was like, that makes total sense. I appreciate that. And John then sat down with me and had a conversation about here's the kind of design tips and design structures and all that kind of stuff. And blending those two from the branded voice and our values and all that kind of stuff to make it, for want of a better phrase, clickable on a YouTube thumbnail, because as I'm sure all the listeners and viewers know, YouTube thumbnails usually look awful and are covered in text and big like shocked faces and all the like typical reaction face stuff that drives me nuts now I'm in my 30s. But it works. So is that finding that balance, I think, and finding where you're comfortable to be open and honest with your audience. That's where I find my voice is the strongest, where it resonates the most with customers and listeners and viewers or whoever your audience is.
I guess it's kind of, I mean, you know, it's a journey, I think, isn't it, to kind of become authentic, you know, and I think that's the thing is that it's you know, now of course you can kind of, you know, pinpoint yourself. So, yeah, I think I'm, you know, being pretty authentic, or I think I've, you know, I'm writing some, you know, content that's, you know, truthful and honest and, you know, sharing my experience. But I think that's the thing is that it's, you know, authenticity kind of goes along with you growing and changing as an individual, right? So I think as you develop and as you kind of get more experience, I think that it's like the authenticity is also about that journey that you kind of bring people on with you. So like you saying about, obviously, you know, you become like a follower or a fan or just somebody who, you know, you kind of, you connect with an individual or you connect with somebody that's doing something or creating something. And, you know, yeah, people will call you a fan or whatever else. Maybe you are a fan or but a lot of the time you think, oh, I the things that I like, I'm like, oh yeah, I kind of think of them as my friend. They don't know that I'm their friend. I think I'm their friend, you know. So it's like any podcasters, I'm like, yeah, you know, I'm their friend type of thing. But then
be honest to me, Sean, just quickly. Have you ever said in conversation, oh yeah, my friend said that the other day, and you meant it was a podcast I was listening to, and you realize like, oh yeah. But I think to briefly interrupt you there, because I think that's the power of podcasting, right? Yeah. That's the intimate nature of this format. And obviously there's been a big transition, and I've totally done this, the transition towards YouTube and video, and I know you guys do video for this show as well. But I think the origins of podcasting, it being in your ears, being that really direct to you, personal kind of thing, maybe that's where my push towards making the content, so thinking about my clients and the people we work with here at Candour and the written content and the video content that we're helping them produce, maybe that's where my kind of thought comes from. Because like you said, I think that parasocial relationship, which has a very negative connotation with a lot of creators, but I think there is a positive side of that as well, where, like you said, some podcasts feel like you're just hanging out with your friends and the listeners feel like they're just hanging out with you guys as friends as well. Mm-hmm. And there's that intimate kind of, oh, if I was there, I would have said this thing. I've been totally guilty of this, by the way. Here's an embarrassing story. I do this fairly regularly because I edit all my own podcasts as well. I will be listening to a podcast and editing it that I am on and think, oh yeah, my co-host said that funny thing, or my guest said that thing. Here's a one-liner in my brain that I would say if I was there. And then the recorded Jack says that out loud. And I'm like, oh, God, yeah, I would say that, wouldn't I? Yeah. I call myself out like, yeah, exactly. But yeah, to kind of pivot back around to you, Sean, I think that's so relevant to that kind of relationship we're developing with our online audience. Everything is online now. And to really, you know, cut between the lines, and that's a mashup of idioms, to cut the wheat from the chaff and read between the lines. There you go. That's two separate things rather than one single phrase. To get that where you actually stand out, you have to resonate with your audience, right? I think that's a hugely important part that is kind of underestimated by a lot of content writers and content creators.
Yeah, it just seems like some of the kind of postulates of marketing, they haven't changed. You know, you're still talking about knowing your audience and people buy from people. and I don't think that will ever change, is just kind of how to navigate it in as Chat GPT would say, in the fast evolving landscape.
Deep dive into a fast evolving landscape.
Exactly. How actually to navigate that. And one of the things that you said when we spoke about the topic is this idea that if you're a content creator, you should actually be like a magazine editor. So tell us a little bit about that. I mean, I'm a journalist in heart as well. So for me, that was a really, really interesting way of saying it. And also when I think about digital spaces and where you are in digital channels and as a brand, it's kind of your own digital magazine when you look at how your brand is in social media channels, how it is in search, how it is in events, even in kind of face-to-face. So tell us a bit about the concept.
Yeah, I think you've absolutely nailed it. I mean, I like that theory where your brand should all be working together. Like it should feel like a digital magazine, I think is a really interesting way of putting it, because whether it's your social channels, whether it's what's appearing on the SERPs from an organic perspective, whether it's your paid ads, whether it's your video content, written content, all that kind of stuff, it should all feel like it's from the same brand or the same person. I've totally experienced it where clients, and again, to hold my hands up, I've totally been guilty of this in the past, and I feel like I've been getting better at it as I get older and more experienced, but where you will see a very clickbaity kind of title thing from one of their ads or whatever it is, and then you click on to the actual thing and it's a very formal, very structured piece of content. Like, oh right, yeah, you just wrote that headline so you could get the clicks, or you just added that tagline to your Google ads, your Meta ads, whatever it is, to get the clicks through. And then once you actually get through, it's really dry and boring and very corporate and very brand focused and isn't telling me anything new or anything useful. You're just focusing on like, here's our brand message and we want to tell you why our products are the best. It's like, yeah, everyone wants to tell me why their products are the best. That's not interesting. And I come from a journalism background as well. I mentioned comics and stuff. I was a comic book reviewer and movie reviewer for a few years as well. And that was where a lot of my original like online publishing, for want of a better phrase, started. That was writing those kind of reviews. And I quickly found that some people really resonate with you as a reviewer or a critic or whatever, and some people will just not. I once wrote this is a very niche subject. I wrote a review for a Superman comic for IGN.com as a freelancer. And it was like my biggest published article. I was like so excited. And I gave it a 5 out of 10. And people lost their minds because 5 out of 10 did not align with their beliefs or whatever. Yeah. I was like, I'm going to be honest here. Just because I'm on the biggest nerdy pop culture site in the world doesn't mean I'm just going to be like, well, I'm just going to give it a 9 because it's safe. And I paid the price for that. I think I only wrote like 2 more articles for them. Maybe that contributed to it, but that wasn't the job I ended up doing at the end of the day. And I think having that, is it the kind of thing you would read, watch, or listen, has always been my mentality when I'm creating stuff. Like I said, I've been in bands through the years. I've created multiple podcasts. I've written bits and pieces here and there, whether that's reviews or fiction or whatever it is. Like we write a lot of for my other podcast, for Sequelizers, we essentially write a movie sequel. We write a sequel that we think would be better than the original sequel to the film. So it's a very creative process, not just us talking about films. There is a process of actually writing the new thing and coming up with about 2,000 words per episode. So it's like it's a sizable thing of writing. And for me, I always think, as I'm writing it, would I care about this? If I was reading this, I know I'm the target audience for this thing because I created this podcast. Otherwise, I wouldn't have done it. So if I'm not interested in it, the audience is not going to be interested in it. And from my experience working with editors, whether that's, like I said, the fiction side of things in comics or the reviews and critical side of things, working with online editors and stuff like that, they're always super, super strict. You really need to prove that you know what you're talking about and why the audience should care. So being that kind of a bit cutthroat and curating stuff and really trimming it down and being, would somebody read this? If it doesn't, leave it in drafts or think of a way of rewording it to make it feel like it would resonate with that audience. For me, that is kind of the key to a lot of this, of creating that new, original, interesting content.
Yeah, and you can do that.
Sorry, Emina, go ahead.
You can do that I always kind of think social media in particular is very good when it comes to kind of that kind of approach. a bit more difficult in search, I find, because of how the algorithm works. And we were talking about information gain before. And one of the things that I asked online, which I would still like to kind of get an answer to, is this idea of, so short form content, for example. A lot of the stuff that I would read would be short form because I'm looking for a specific answer. Unfortunately, and you'd see that in like recipes, particularly recipes, you know, you have that massive recipe, you know, like so much information at the start that's completely
they always want to
irrelevant.
tell you about their like life story and why it's their
And
great
then,
grandmother's recipe and all that
yes,
kind of stuff.
exactly. And then you have at the end, I think somebody put those in a 404.
Yeah, they did.
Maybe it was
Yeah.
Patrick, I think. Was it Patrick?
Yeah.
And then you see, oh, Jack is a listener. So, and then only then do you get to the recipe. And that happens a lot in search. And one of the things that I've been kind of thinking about is, are we ever going to get to a point where that is not needed? So you don't have to like fill. So you're talking about information gain. Is information gain already saying what's there and then add into the discussion? Or can we just add to the discussion without actually regurgitating what's already there on the SERP? And I don't know the answer to that because we've seen it both ways. Sometimes you do something that is purely information game, like a Q&A, for example, and it actually ranks. Other times you do that and it just doesn't rank. And it's kind of the same strategy, but it just doesn't rank. You have to kind of put everything in the kitchen sink to actually, you know, get the rankings. And you know that what the searcher is actually looking for is probably that one piece of a gold nugget that's somewhere in there that will make them convert. But you can't just use that. You have to do everything else to be able to you know, rank. So
Yeah, I think there's definitely a balance to find there, and you're totally right. When it works with one site or works with one client, then completely tanks and doesn't work with another client. So there's never that kind of one size fits all kind of method to it. But I think the information gain discussion, I think, is really interesting, especially when it comes to short form content. There's that like parallel discussion of like information density, right? Where there's that how much new information, how much of this perspective am I getting that is new, essentially like per word? Is it 10,000 words and only like 4 or 5 paragraphs of those 10,000 words are actually new information, and you're just, like we said, giving context and recapping other stuff, and you're just not actually contributing anything new? For me, I think that's a lot with short form content. And again, I'm going to use podcasting as an example because it's me. Like,
it's your jam.
Exactly what you guys do and what I do with the social media clips and stuff, right? You pull out a little highlight of something interesting the guest said or something like that. And I found an interesting kind of reaction from audience. I've done a ton of tests and experiments and stuff over the years, whether that was me doing a clip saying, this week my guest is Emina Demiri Watson and we're going to talk about this thing and blah, 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 and this is the topic and that. And it's just me talking to camera for 30 seconds, introducing the topic. Will that entice the person to go and listen to the full podcast? Turns out, probably not. I'm not telling them any more information. They're not getting any value from that apart from who is this guest and what the topic is. If they are interested in that specific guest or specific topic, maybe they'll click through. What is far more valuable, especially as short form content, is a clip from the topic that, for example, you and I were talking about, Emina, on Search for Candour, or this podcast itself. Maybe this will be the social clip. Who knows? That would be a weird, ironic thing of me talking about the theory behind social clips in the social clip. But there's that. Actually give the audience part of the content that is valuable. Don't just say, hey, we have this person on the podcast this week and you should go and listen to it because they're awesome and clever and they're a great guest. End of story. Yeah. Actually give them, here is a tip or a piece of advice or a story from them that is going to get people engaged. And essentially you're doing the first taste is free kind of mentality, right? You're giving them a piece of information like, oh, wow, that guest really knew what they were talking about. I've already learned something from this 30, 45, 60-second piece of content. I can learn even more if I tune into the full hour. Imagine all the tidbits and various bits of advice you could find from that. And I think for me, that's that balance you find between giving stuff away for free, like I said, and providing that value. And I think I very much now lean towards giving people free stuff, like whether that's social media content, whether that's obviously the podcast is free anyway, but in terms of time investment and stuff, right? And like I said, that information density, if you can get a point across in that 30 seconds that then can build upon the topic or build upon that thing. And I think this applies to written content. You have the introduction almost, but not quite. Going back to my scientific background, because I have a science degree, there's that element where you have a introduction to a scientific paper or a research paper where it kind of summarizes, here's what's going to happen.
The main point, yeah.
This is the main point. If you want to know more, you can go and read more. But really, the summary of our findings is this. We find that this correlates to this, and overall, it probably is this. And you can kind of sum it up in a handful of sentences. Do that with your content. Have an element of content, a summary of key findings, the initial thought process, and kind of cut that down as part of the introduction, so you don't have the waffle, the whole, and we were established in 2015 and we started doing this thing, and then I joined the company in 2021 and blah blah blah, and here's my journey, and I've been podcasting for 15 years and all this kind of stuff. Go straight in with, I have written this content, here's how you do the thing. And I think this ties into a lot of the big discussion obviously about AI overviews and how that's pulling content from people, and the big worry that it's going to steal even more clicks than featured snippets do and all that kind of stuff, despite Google's, oh yeah, you get totally more clicks and impressions from AI overviews. Don't worry, everything's fine. You'll get, they're so much more engaging. They say the audience loves it. Don't worry about it. But I think there is a genuine side to that of building that brand awareness, building that loyalty to creators and brands and stuff like that. When I know that I can go and follow, I'll use Alice Rowan, who's one of my favorite creators in SEO, talking about content writing and stuff. Alice Rowan is completely unfiltered, swears all the time. Her like main homepage is like no bullshit SEO. Essentially, it's a big sweary headline thing. I'm like, cool. You know what you're getting. If you're going to work with that person, you know what you're getting straight away, and it feels very authentic. And if you're going to resonate with that, you can find the right clients for you. You understand what kind of people you're going to work with. And for me, that is so much more interesting than like, yeah, we're a great brand who does good SEO. Like, why?
Sean, you see, like seriously, I said that our slogan should be "We get shit done."
There you go.
It is internally.
It really very much is "We get shit done" is internally slogan. But, you know, externally, we kind of came to like an understanding, as you were saying
get
before.
Stuff done,
it's about,
right? Yeah,
it's about kind of thinking about who you are as a person, and all of us who we, you know, every employee that's in Vixen, what do they contribute, and how can we turn that into brand values and you know, the direction we are going with as a brand.
Yeah.
But you know, everything that you were saying, Jack, honestly, it's like I really agree, but I also partly agree because, you know, I have my own agenda. Like one of the things that I push quite a lot is this idea of being a T-shaped marketer, you know, kind of thinking about not just search, but you got to think about the bigger picture. And I think it really ties into this idea of branding and authenticity and stuff. And that's the problem that sometimes SEOs fall into is this kind of like, oh, I do SEO. Well, these days, if you just do SEO, it's not gonna have the impact. You have to be able to know the top of the T really before anything else, because otherwise it's just not going to work, and we've seen it like everywhere. So
it's really been a theme for a lot of guests on Search with Candour this year, weirdly enough, has been that understanding and expanding outside of the SEO silo. So at time of recording, I'd just spoken to Ashley Liddell from Deviation, and we were talking about how his slogan for Deviation is search everywhere, social search, all that kind of stuff, and how SEO isn't just as simple as just being on Google anymore. And you're totally right. I mean, like understanding what kind of content you are pushing out on those platforms, and the teams working together and having communication of like, okay, we have this. You know, for example, the outreach team is doing this thing. So we know we're creating content to build links. We're like, okay, cool. How can that content also be used on our social media pages, which can then also be used from an organic search perspective? don't just write content for one piece of the pie, for one siloed section of the industry. Understand how content can be repurposed across different platforms, and how you can grow your brand across multiple different search engines. Even like think about how Google relates to Bing, relates to Brave Search, or even international search engines as well. How that all ties together, I think, is weirdly enough, like obviously we went from a very general marketing perspective, before the internet, and then I feel like a lot of people have kind of specialized and gone like, okay, I'm a PPC person, I'm a technical SEO person, I don't do content writing, I'm a content marketer, I don't do all the technical stuff, and everybody's kind of siloed themselves out. But I think not necessarily individually, but if you're working as a brand in an agency, in-house, whatever it is, you need to be working with the other experts. And then funny enough, it was something I was talking about with Patrick from Sitebulb the other week, was that kind of skills gap where so many people, like, I'm not the most technical SEO. We have far more clever technical SEO people here at Candour, but understanding that I should learn the basics at least, and understand and spread your skills slightly. I've done a little bit of PPC, I've done a little bit of content marketing, I've done a little bit of outreach, I've done a little bit of link building, like understanding the very basics so you can be in that conversation and be relevant and understand what that team's goals are, where they want their KPIs to be, and how you can then contribute to that and build, for example, a single piece of content that serves multiple masters without spreading yourself too thin. Obviously that's an absolute dream. That's an ideal world, but I think that is something we could be striving for when all of the teams are working together, when we're all on the same page and being authentic about the brand, understanding the voice behind everything and making sure it's aligned across the different channels. To me, I notice that stuff. Maybe it's just because I go in with my marketing brain and I can't switch it off of like, oh yeah, I saw your social posts, and like Ryanair, for example, who have their unhinged social media posting. That was a whole trend like late last year, was the whole like, oh wow, okay. And you go on their website and it's like, welcome to Ryanair. Would you like to book a flight and do this thing? And you can get discounts. Please make sure your baggage allowance is calculated correctly. I'm like, what happened to the crazy stuff you were saying on Instagram like 10 seconds ago? Where's the giant AI generated cat photoshopped across the top of the airport? Like, it felt really weird to me. It worked from a certain perspective, but for me, it felt really jarring to be like, okay, the social media guys are going nuts, and your newsletters are just like, and welcome to the brand, and we are Ryanair, and we're going to talk very clearly and very corporately.
I love the fact that you kind of get the airline host voice to accompany this.
I'm a voice actor as well, so I can't help myself.
I know exactly what you mean, but it's a difficult one because a part of me is thinking, like, the social media guys are onto something here. Yeah. So why aren't we like looking at how you can rebrand to kind of integrate that more into, it doesn't have to be completely. Or,
even like, tongue in cheek kind of like, tongue in cheek kind of, just like a nod to that kind of messaging and stuff. And like you don't,
all business.
It's like, it's basically, it's just not a bit taking yourself so seriously, I guess, and not being as serious all the time. And I think that's it's a really good, because there's so many brands that do it, and there's so many brands that, like, you have these like McDonald's Burger King wars on Twitter, or you have like, all these, and social media kind of gone wild type of thing. But then that's it, is that it just doesn't, it just lasts there. And it's like, okay, it's over there in the wild west of Twitter, but then we're not going to, but it's like, it's got thousands of likes and like people really resonate with it. And it's like, well, then the audience comes to their site and it's exactly like you say. It's like, oh, great. Okay, here we go.
I really noticed that McDonald's is a brilliant example. Like when you get the brand wars you see on Twitter, where some person, obviously the social media team, reply to as if they are like the girl from Wendy's or whatever it is, the US restaurant chain. It's like, oh, they're in character. That's a bit weird. And they're being playful about it. And then McDonald's reply with something else and blah, blah, blah. And then you see a YouTube ad for McDonald's, or you turn on the TV and it's like, welcome to McDonald's, the latest 99p burger, blah, blah, blah. There's no humor. There's no nothing. It's just,
it's like really family oriented. It's like, bring your family to McDonald's.
100%. Yeah.
Like morning coffee on the way to work.
Okay, I would like to think that there is some like method to that madness, that disconnect. Maybe it's about the fact that actually, like, the people that actually spend the money are the serious people. It's the same with Ryanair. You know, maybe the fact that, you know, you're getting this all of this coverage and awareness on social media isn't kind of translating into enough revenue for you to say, okay, right, this is the audience that we're going to be targeting. And because obviously, you know, there's always this kind of question around engagers and the revenue bringers or whatever.
Definitely, yeah.
You know, sometimes they're not the same thing. Sometimes it's
true. I mean, but I guess it's like, you know, talking about authenticity and that's the truth really, is that if we're talking about brands being more authentic, then they need to have like, you know, a single voice really, and it's consistent. Like they need to have something that they, you know, stay loyal to in terms of how they speak and how they interact. Like if you've got many voices and many personas, well, then that's just suspicious for everybody, you know? So it's like, so no wonder, obviously people will, you know, potentially not think that, you know, a brand is authentic if they've got loads of different voices and loads of different personas, and they've got, you know, the social media team doing one thing, they've got the you know, YouTube video content marketing team doing another thing. If they've got, you know, and then you go to their website, you go to their, you know, their kind of anything like you know, TV advertisement and doing another thing. So it's like, okay, well, where does this brand sit, and who is your audience? Because it's not me, you know, because it's like, because you don't know which one do I fit into. And I think, yeah, I guess that kind of comes back round to that on the authenticity side. It's just like that consistency, I guess.
Definitely, yeah. I think that's a really good point when it comes round to speaking about like Ryanair or McDonald's or whatever. These are household brands that can get away with that kind of stuff. Whereas it comes to, again, not speaking for Vixen clients or Candour clients or anything like that, but we work with big businesses that are big, international, millions and millions of dollars of revenue. And I have worked with tiny little local guys who I'm helping to literally just get their business profile set up and all that kind of stuff. So the biggest to the absolute smallest, literally people down the road and people that have headquarters around the world kind of stuff. And when you are a household name like McDonald's, you can run those ads for a little bit, get a bit of social media engagement.
Yeah.
That you're not going to sell any more or less burgers at the end of the day.
Yeah.
And I think you're totally right there, Sean, thinking about how that voice can work on different platforms, because you've obviously got to tailor to the different audience. Come around what you just said, Emina, as well, like that there are different audiences on these different platforms, and understanding who you're speaking to, like again coming around to the transforming a podcast into various different types of content. So writing a blog post about my findings when I was interviewed by Sean and Emina, and I was talking about this thing, and we talked about this thing, and going off onto the Candour blog and writing a blog post about it. I can't even say blog post. I keep trying to say podcast. But then turning that into social content of that can be a carousel on LinkedIn of like the 5 things I learned from my conversation with Sean and Emina. And then the social clip we mentioned earlier, which is the vertical format, Instagram reel, TikTok-y kind of stuff. And I've been experimenting recently, and they have got quite good engagement. So maybe a little hint for you guys as well. Clipping out entire segments of the show. So like 3, 4, 5 minute whole bits of conversation in normal landscape, 16:9, like full screen, and putting that on LinkedIn. And they are doing fairly well. And there's this interesting thing, because I think the audience changes so much from Instagram to organic search to TikTok to LinkedIn to wherever, to paid ads as well. You're trying to grab people's attention. And I think when it comes to something like LinkedIn as an example, that's a way more work focused, professional, kind of corporate kind of thing. And like I said, essentially giving away the content for free, posting an entire section of, here is a question I asked my guest and here's their answer in full that gives all of the information, is a nice little segment that we're saying gives away that information for free. And then also having a version that is 45 seconds long, that is super snappy, tightly edited, vertical format, all that kind of stuff. And then also writing that up into a carousel or into a piece that works from an organic perspective, or discussing a topic that then can work for link building purposes. From this discussion, I got the idea to think about these kind of statistics, and actually that would work. And turns out 99% of survey people say this thing, and then that works as an outreach piece of content and all that kind of stuff. There are little threads you can pick up on to then cater to those different audiences. And I think for me, that's the most difficult bit of that process, is finding your voice. That can be a, as we said, a whole journey that you will never stop learning from, essentially, throughout your career and throughout your life. But being able to tailor your content and, as you said, Emina, being that T-shaped marketer who is aware of all the different sides of marketing and how your work as an SEO relates to the paid team, relates to the social team, relates to, sometimes it's an entirely separate agency who is doing the paid or the social compared to you coming in as the SEO team. And you're having to kind of balance all these different things. And I think that is the hardest part, is to understand how audiences change and the kind of content and tailoring it from there. But if you have that foundation of that branding, and especially true for small businesses, like I said, you can get away with a lot if you're McDonald's,
brand,
like one of the biggest household names in the world. But if you're, I don't know, Jack's local ice cream shop, then you probably can't get away with unhinged social media content. People will be like, what is this guy doing? Why is this ice cream seller in Norwich talking about crazy stuff on Twitter?
Yeah, exactly. I think that does make a difference. And, we could sit here for forever talking about it, but, we haven't spoken about kind of company values and brand values and things like that, which for me, that's what brings it together quite a lot. So you can flex how you tell your message on the platforms, and you should be flexing and the format and a bit the tone as well, depending on the audience that's on the platform. You're not going to be talking to TikTok audiences the same as you say LinkedIn audiences. And when you're repurposing your content, you need to kind of be thinking about what the platform is, what the audience is there, and how you can package it so that it resonates with them. But what brings it together is a message and, the values that a brand has. So as long as you're aligning with that, I think it's fine to kind of flex.
Yeah, definitely.
But you need to find that authenticity in your values and your messaging that goes across the board to bring it all together, really.
Yeah, definitely. We have 4 kind of core values here at Candour, and we've got them again on the new website that we'll be launching very soon, and a few other places. Like, we have these printed out little things in one of the conference rooms and stuff like that. Surprise, surprise, Candour is one of them, because we want to be candid. We're called Candour for a reason, right? We want to be candid and open and frank, whether that is our social media content, whether that is me on the podcast, whether that's Mark being on a guest on a podcast or on a webinar or speaking at a conference. We're still representing the brand and being relevant and open and honest about it. If we've struggled with this thing, we'll say about it. And that's also true for communication with clients as well. I know this is something, again, we talked about when you were on Search with Candour, Emina, being that communicative style of agency compared to fluffing the numbers, not reporting something because it looks bad, all that kind of stuff. It's much better from my experience. And I have literally had this feedback from clients to say, like, you are the first agency we've worked with who said, this particular category page or whatever it is has gone down. Let's have a look into that and find out why, rather than just ignore the bad stuff. Everything's up. Everything's fine. Don't worry. Loads of money. Don't worry about it. Just shut up. Don't worry about it. Whereas actually diving into the details and saying, actually, this campaign didn't go particularly well, and here's why, here's what we've learned from it, here's what we want to change, and having that conversation with the client and saying, how do you feel about it? Did you think this campaign, did you get the inkling this was going to work or not work? Let's have a conversation so we can plan for the future. And again, like we're saying, continue to learn and be on that journey and all that kind of stuff. And the other 3 values, I think, tie together quite nicely, particularly cooperation and ownership, which again I think is a huge part of being authentic. And like I said, cooperation with the different teams within your company, all that kind of stuff. We want to be inclusive to every audience, to every person, all that kind of thing. And that open, honest discussion within teams of like I said, I had one of the designers come to me and be like, hey, your YouTube thumbnail doesn't look very good. Can we work together to sort this stuff out? I was like, yes, that sounds like a brilliant idea. I know more about the YouTube side of things, but you know what works from font and color combinations. And I am a terrible artist. I don't know what I'm talking about. So here's the guy with 20 years of design experience. Please work with me so we can find this balance where it works. And the ownership of the content, I think, is hugely relevant for organic search. And like we talk about with our work here at Candour, because you kind of need to know who's writing it. Like we're saying with the unhinged social media stuff, or the I'm sure you guys have seen this in many times, where you'll get a client who has written a bunch of pretty decent content, and the writer is assigned to admin or staff or whatever. And it comes back around to the WEAT side of things, like who wrote this content? Like I put my name on every podcast. Like if you go and look at the Candour website, you can see all of the podcasts there and it says author Jack Chambers Ward. The ones that Mark hosted says author Mark Williams Cook. So you can see the difference there. And I think that is relevant, especially if you have multiple writers and multiple people working for the same brand, bringing their own perspectives. And as you were saying, I mean, the flex of the voice and the adjustments that different people bring, then the piece of content that I would write about brand authenticity or whatever it is for my client would be different to how you write it, Sean, to be different how you write it, Mina, because we all have different experiences, right? We all come from our different perspectives. So making that feel more unique and actually like, oh, this is a real person that has done these things, that has this experience, that has this expertise, WEAT again, that becomes hugely relevant to me because, like I said, you then can build a loyalty to that writer. Oh, I know that Sean is my favorite movie reviewer and Emina is my favorite sci-fi novel writer or whatever. Like that's how you build that kind of loyalty and understanding of take ownership for what works, what doesn't, and be honest about it and say, I created this content. It absolutely kicked ass. It looks amazing. It's done amazing wonder. It's transformed this client or whatever it is. And then our final value is ingenuity. And I think that's trying to do something new, pushing the boundaries, be open to collaborating with other people who know stuff better than you and challenge yourself to do better and grow and understand and disrupt the status quo. I hate the phrase like disrupt the industry and all that because I think a bunch of charlatans and idiots say that kind of stuff. But I think it is relevant to a small degree, like we're saying with the unhinged social media stuff. Like it got attention. It worked on social media.
Oh, I love reading them. So
yeah, exactly. I'm vegetarian, so I didn't go and buy more McDonald's burgers necessarily. But like, sure, I mean, they got the McPlant, I guess. But still, I think there is. Like, don't be afraid to push yourself if there is opportunity for improvement. If you know, oh, I think I can do this better again, don't be afraid to go back to old content and refresh it and update it. And you realize like, oh, I've learned so much in the 2 years since that was last published. Maybe we should go back and have a look at that and see that actually the things I've learned over this period would make that piece of content 10 times, 5 times better than it was when, 2 years ago, Jack wrote it. Now I have all of this other experience and knowledge and, again, another 2 years of podcast and speaking to guests and speaking to guys like yourselves, that then adds to your experience, right? There's a new contribution. That's that information gain. You're adding more information to the content there. And I think, again, bit of a tangent, but I think a lot of people underestimate that refresh of content power as well. Taking a lot of it was fine kind of content. Like, yeah, it did decent numbers. It did this, it did that. It drove some revenue. It drove some clicks, whatever it was. But actually going back and being like, how can we make this really shine and really work? Or if it doesn't, repurpose it in some other way, get rid of it. There's so many options there. But I think that final point is really kind of resonating with me where, like I said, I'm always testing new things on social stuff. I'm testing different YouTube thumbnails, all this kind of stuff. And I'm always learning, oh, that was a terrible idea. Oh, that really tanked that viewership. I need to change that title. I need to adjust this thing. And the power of like A/B testing and all that kind of stuff I find really, really interesting. And in ways where you don't even think of it. Like we work with the guys over at SEO testing here at Candour. We do a lot of that stuff for new content launches and all that kind of stuff. I'm just doing that with the built-in YouTube stuff for YouTube. It's like, okay, I'll do a really clickbaity one, a really branded, clean, no text on the screen kind of one, and then somewhere in the middle where it's got a little bit of text and I'm pulling a silly face, but I'm not doing a crazy face. So there's a little bit of balance there and see what works. And I think being able to experiment, being open to being wrong and being able to learn from that and push yourself and take opportunities when they arise is a hugely important part when it comes to being a better content creator than you were 6 months ago, 6 weeks ago, 6 years ago, whatever it is.
Yeah, no, I completely agree. Completely. It's a good time to, I mean, I could sit here and talk to you, Jack, for the next 3 hours, as you know. I mean, when I was at your podcast, we stayed way too long.
I think it was one of the longest episodes I've ever done, I think.
Oh, I'm sorry. I did go on a couple of tangents and rants. I do like doing that.
It's what the podcast is all about, mate.
Authentic self. It's my authentic self.
Exactly.
The ranty, going into a different direction person. All right. So at the end of the episode, as you know, we always do our little let's banish something into the room 404, never to be seen again. Technically, it should be 410. We always say that. So Jack, over to you. You have the pleasure to banish something. What are you banishing?
I want to talk about reporting, specifically month-to-month style of reporting, because it drives me mad. Because I think you can really send the wrong message to a client if you're looking at really short-term losses or gains. I think you should very much lean on kind of 3 different options. If it's seasonal stuff and you know the client works, especially e-commerce stuff when it comes to Christmas, Valentine's Day, Halloween, whatever it is, all that kind of stuff, compare that to last year's numbers. Year-on-year reporting for me is so much more powerful. And granted, it becomes a bit more difficult with all the data limits we get from Search Console and GA4. Go and archive your data, folks, so you can do year-on-year data. That's very important. But month-to-month reporting for me drives me crazy. And I think we've kind of moved a lot towards a lot of quarterly stuff here at Candour. I think that's much more relevant, and you can see, again, year on year, so quarter to quarter comparison year on year, I think is a really interesting way of looking at a lot of businesses, because that's how so much of their budgets work. That's how much they're kind of, like we're saying, like content creation sprints and loads of businesses work in quarters. So comparing September to August is like, cool, that's the end of Q3 to the beginning of Q4 or whatever it is. Like, that's not particularly relevant discussion. So month-to-month reporting, where you're just comparing how we did this month compared to last month, in general, I think it causes more trouble than it's worth. So it can get in 404.
I agree. I do agree with that. I really do. And it's but it's difficult with clients to get them to move away from month-to-month reporting.
Like
everybody wants to know, how did we do? Are we better this month than we were last month? No, you were not better this month because it's August.
I think it comes with trust, though, doesn't it? And like time with the relationship. Like, I think when you've worked with a client for a while, they kind of start to see, okay, maybe it is, a bit pointless to be kind of looking at how we did last month and then look at this month. And I think as they get more, and as you develop that relationship and get more trust with each other and think, you tend to be able to kind of go, right, well, actually, why don't we just start to have a look at quarters instead? Or why don't we actually have a look at some year-on-year reporting and see, because then you get especially with SEO, it's like, look, I can't really show you much month on month. Sometimes I can't really show you much after 3 months.
Yep.
But then if you go like, right, in 12 months time, we're going to have a look at this, and you'll see something that's actually worth looking at, and something that you can actually pinpoint and go, look, all of that work, and I was telling you to just stick it out. Now look, and you can get a much more kind of, a better look back, really. And I think, but I think that, it does take time to kind of build that trust with the client sometimes for them to kind of to come round to that idea, I guess.
Definitely.
Or alternatively, we could just put it in room 404 and forget about it.
There we go.
It's a much quicker fix.
Okay.
Let's just put
This
it
is why we got 404, because you can always 301 redirected out of there. So.
Hey, there you go. As long as you don't 410 it, you'll be all right.
Yeah, exactly. No, some of the things are secretly in 410, but we don't talk about those. Secret. Jack, where can people find you online? Is there anything else that you want to say as an ending? Where can people connect to you? I know you guys are going to be at Brighton SEO as well for another live podcast. Tell us.
Yeah, a couple of live events coming up. So we've got the live podcast the day before the main Brighton SEO conference kicks off. Like I said, that's me, Sarah, and Tasman teaming up with the guys from SEO Mindset. Funny enough, we're talking all about strategic career planning and how to not get overwhelmed from that, which I think is a very interesting conversation. As you mentioned before, Emina, we had talked about authenticity and how to be your authentic self on a previous, I think two episodes ago now. We do it every 6 months, coinciding with Brighton SEO. So that's coming up on Wednesday, the 2nd of October. You can get tickets from Eventbrite. You can search SEO Mindset or search with Candour on Eventbrite. You can find us there. There'll be links on all of our social media pages and stuff like that as well. If you want to find Search with Candour, again, search for it on YouTube, all that kind of stuff. We're based on every possible podcast platform, Spotify, Apple, all that kind of stuff. If you want to go with candour.co.uk, that's the easiest way to find Candour, and you can find the podcast on our blogs there as well. I'm JLW Chambers on absolutely everything. I haven't updated my handle since I got married and double-barreled my surname, so I just stick with Chambers because, again, I want to stick with my brand, I guess. Speaking of branding, as much of a small brand that I have personally. And if you want to come and hear me talk about bad film sequels for 2 to 3 hours every week, Sequelizers is my movie podcast as well, if you want to come and listen to another version of me talking about films rather than SEO.
Yeah, and I would add, one of the things that we didn't talk about, but is, I know, close to both of us, is neurodivergence in SEO,
yes.
which is another group that you founded, which is a very important one for everybody really to check out.
Sarah Presh and I co-founded Neurodivergence in SEO about a year and a half ago now. It's mostly a Slack channel, but we are on social media and stuff as well. You can find that ndinseo.com. We didn't want to risk people trying to spell the word neurodivergence because that's always risky. ND and SEO is the way to find us there. We will be doing meetups, and we've got kind of like webinars and stuff coming up as well. We're doing a public speaking and pitching webinar series that's coming up. We're working with the guys from International Search Summit, and they're going to be kind of working with those guys. A few of us are going to be at that event later on in November as well. And for the events that we run here at Candour, we have Search Norwich coming up on the 23rd of October. We have Crystal Carter from Wix and Martin Split from Google as our speakers.
Oh,
and
nice.
It's free. There's free food. What more could you want? And I kind of run that. I've taken over the running, planning, organizing, all that stuff for Search Norwich recently. So that's kind of become my new little baby. So it's totally free event in the evening on the 23rd of October if you want to travel down to Norwich. It's a bit out of the way, I appreciate, but all of our talks and stuff do go online as well. They're on a YouTube channel, so you can go and check those out at the Search Norwich YouTube channel as well.
Brilliant. Thank you so much.
Thanks so much, Jack. Thank you. Yeah, thank you very much again for coming on.
Thank you for having me. Like I said, I'm a fan. I'm a listener already. It's cool.
Thank you so much.
We feel very privileged to have a seasoned pro as a listener. Well, thank you everybody for watching another episode of SEOs Getting Coffee. Hopefully you enjoyed it and you learned a little bit more about authenticity and how that can help you achieve wins with your content in 2025 and beyond. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel and to listen to our episodes. We're also everywhere. Actually, we're not everywhere. We're on Spotify.
We're not everywhere.
We're not everywhere. We should be everywhere. There you go. I've learned a lot today.
We're on YouTube and Spotify.
They're the two big ones.
Yeah, so
as well as Apple, I guess. Yeah.
But yeah, drop us a comment if you have any questions. We'll put in the links also to some of the resources and bits that Jack mentioned. And hopefully see you on the next episode.
See everyone. Bye-bye.
Thanks, Jack.